What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the recap session of the Austrian Championship. Today was round number 5 and I managed to win again against David Shengelia, fellow Grandmaster, who is also my previous coach and now dear friend. So I'm I'm playing against many of my friends in this tournament, which was clear from the start. But yeah, definitely always interesting to play someone you know very well. So today I went for e4 and he played the Sicilian defense, which I also prepared for, and after c takes d4, knight takes d4, now he played g6, transposing to the Marozzi defense after c4. Now I mostly prepared for some of the major systems here, like knight f6, knight c3, d6, the rouser, Sicilian rouser, which is very sharp, and I had some ideas up my sleeve here. But he went for g6. He kind of expected that I was prepared pretty well here and didn't want to enter these complications. And he went for a very solid system, the Marozzi defense, which tends to be slightly worse for black because white has the center. But black is very solid, has pretty natural development, and he also managed to get quite a good position later on, as we will see. Now he played this move queen b6, which has gotten popular pretty recently. People used to play like this, knight f6, knight c3, and now d6, and this is one of the big lines here of the Marozzi. But he went for queen b6, which asks white the question where the knight will go. Also the queen hits the pawn on b2, so white has two moves here, knight b5 or knight b3. I went for knight b3. And now queen d8, so if black plays this line, he will be fine with the draw here, knight d4, white could repeat. But I wanted to play, of course, with the white pieces, and I played queen d2. I just want to point out knight c3 immediately is a bit less precise because black can take here, ruining white's pawn structure. And even though black's kingside here looks a bit weakened, it doesn't matter that much actually, and black mostly doesn't castle just, goes d6, bishop e6, and puts pressure on the c4 pawn, and black tends to be pretty okay here. So I went queen e2 first, and now f3. Knight c3 right away is also an option, but it allows knight g4, so therefore I did not want to go for this. I went f3, protecting the pawn on e4 and preventing knight g4. And now he went a5, which I was quite surprised to see. I think that castle is more logical, but after knight c3, now he cannot play a5 anymore, because now I always have knight a4, at least that's what I thought in the game, and I have ideas with knight b6 or bishop b6, and his whole queenside is pretty cramped here. So he went a5 right away, knight c3, and after a4 here, I went knight d4, which is not the best move, knight c5, which I also thought about during the game. Now I'm kind of forcing black to play a3, otherwise I'm taking the pawn. But after b3 here, I was thinking about this position, and this pawn on a3 is a long-term target, but I didn't like my knight on c5 here. It will go back to d3 later on, but yeah, I wasn't sure. Something like this here, and yeah, the knight. I thought knight d3 in the game, and I thought black can maybe push for some early e6 and d5, and I didn't know exactly what was happening here. So I went for the more standard knight d4, and after d6, bishop e2. My opponent pointed out after the game that it might be a better idea to keep the knights on the board, which I kind of didn't even think about, because now after bishop e2, he managed to exchange these knights, and now he really has a very decent position actually. So knight b5, and if you have more space, it always makes sense to keep also more pieces on the board, and this would have been the right call here, and then to continue with bishop e2 and short castle. But yeah, I went bishop e2, now he took, and after castle, I castled short. Here I also thought about long castle, which is often an idea here in these sorts of positions. White just wants to proceed with king b1 and then start an attack on the king side here, but I wasn't sure if I'm in time after something like queen a5, king b1, bishop b6. Black is pretty fast here when it comes to counterplay on the queen side with rook fca to come. So I played pretty solidly here, and rook b1 apparently is a mistake. The computer suggests b4, but first of all, I didn't understand what's happening after queen takes b4. Some very concrete things here, e5, like I didn't see any of this. I guess the point is that d takes e5 doesn't work because of bishop b6, yeah, and queen a6, c5, and the queen is trapped on a6, which is actually pretty nice. I did not see this at all. But also what I wasn't sure at all during the game was a position like this, where black gets two rooks for the queen, and yeah, something like bishop e6, to me, it didn't look like anything, but okay, now knight d5 is winning on the spot because the rook on a1 is hanging. But I guess something like rook a8, and yeah, to me it didn't look clear at all, but according to the computer, this is pretty good for white. So b4 right away would have been the way to go. I went rook b1, and now rook c1. I wanted to prepare b3 or b4, and yeah, therefore rook c1. Again, the computer says b3 or b4. It's the same. If black takes, this is more accurate, but it will lead to similar positions. That's what I thought, at least. So I went rook c1, rook c8. Now b4. Again, b3 is, I think, the same, because after b4, black also has to take. A takes b, a takes b. And now he went queen b4, and now I started to kind of dislike my position, even though it's equal. Black has great control over these dark squares here, and he just wants to play knight d7, knight c5, rook a3 at some point, and this pawn on b3 is also quite weak. I went bishop e3, knight d7. I wanted to keep the bishops on the board here, which was also not a great decision probably. But I thought I still have kind of more space, so it would make sense to keep them on the board still. Queen b2 is what I also saw now that knight d7 doesn't work anymore because of bishop takes g7, and there's the discovery here with knight d5. But what we both saw in the game was knight g4, and the point is bishop takes g7 loses because of queen c5 check. This is checkmate, and king h1 is also this famous checkmate here with queen g1 and knight f2. But what we both missed was that after knight g4, knight a4 is winning, because after bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, the knight has to move, and now knight b6 wins the exchange. So queen b2 would have been a bit smarter for sure in this position. I went bishop e3, knight d7, and now I originally intended queen c2, but then I saw that he can just take on c3, and even though he gave up this bishop, this endgame is very unpleasant. I thought b5, and I'm maybe even losing this pawn, and yeah, therefore I decided to play bishop g5, which also didn't feel right, but I simply wanted to confuse him here. Pawn on e7 is now hanging, and if king f8, I have this nice tactic with knight d5, and I would be winning. He went knight c5, attacking the pawn on b3. I defended with bishop d1, and now he played f6, which was the first step into the wrong direction. Rook a3 would have been nice to just continue putting pressure on this pawn here, and there I would be already in a bit of trouble. f6, and now he missed knight d5, because now if he takes, the queen is falling on b4, so he has to capture here, and now I'm threatening both knight b6 and knight takes e7, so he captured here, and f5. Computer points out that rook a2 is more accurate, but I already thought that this position is a bit yeah, not so easy for black here. If I manage to push away all his pieces, then I'm the one who is better, but it turns out here black still has a lot of activity, enough to compensate for the bishop pair. He went f5, I took, and I went bishop c2, and now I was already starting to feel pretty happy here, because this pawn on f5 is very weak. Went bishop d4 check, king f1, rook a2, and now bishop e1. This is what he missed. This was probably the only really good move in the game which I played, just defending the square on f2. And now I'm getting ready to take on f5. He went bishop e3, very logical. Bishop takes f5. This is the only way, because otherwise he would just take the exchange. And here what he missed after rook f8 is that I have rook c2, and he probably thought that he was winning here because my bishop and the rook is attacked, but after rook c2 he cannot take on f5 because of rook takes a2, and he tried rook a3, but yeah, now I was just a pawn up and the bishop pair, and now all of his pieces were in quite some trouble here. Rook takes f3 was the final blunder, but his position's already lost here. King g2, rook b3 I took, and rook f2 was again very nice, because if he goes to e5, which he did in the game, now bishop takes h7 is winning, because if he takes, I win this exchange here. And if he wants to go bishop h6, with the idea that now taking doesn't work because the rook is defended, then at least in the game I thought I have bishop c3, which is also the best move. And now he cannot avoid checkmate here with bishop e6 check, and he could only take, but then of course I'm winning. Yeah, so he went for this, but after rook takes f8, king f8, now I'm just winning here. I'm a pawn up, and this pawn is also pretty useless, and I have the bishop pair, so the rest was pretty easy here. And after knight c3, I decided to go into this opposite color bishop endgame, because as I said, I have these two passers connected, and yeah, I just put my pawn on a square where it cannot be captured, and now I'm just starting to push my pawns. He went e6, but let's say he goes something like king g7, I would go bishop f5, and then just king g4, h5, h6, g6, g7, and I'm just winning. He went e6, I took, went bishop f5, and d5, h5, and here after king g4 he resigned, because king h5 will come, and then g6, g7, and yeah, the game is over. So I was pretty lucky today, I would argue, but yeah, yesterday I was more unlucky, so it always like balances out. Obviously very happy with the win. I'm now in the sole lead of the Austrian Championship, but there are still four more rounds to go. So yeah, thank you for tuning in. And in the meanwhile, you can follow me on my socials, Instagram, Twitter. You can check out my website, felixburger.com. And until then, see you next time.